Javitt, you and your firm are among those helping to develop the Israeli-produced vaccine. We'll get to that in a moment. I want to ask you, though, the fact that Israel went ahead without FDA approval to start administering the booster shot, but in this case felt they had to wait for the FDA in order to sign off on the vaccination of children suggests that it's not an easy call from a healthcare perspective.
It's an extraordinarily tough call, and it's a really difficult public health question. Now, I graduated from the Harvard School of Public Health about 40 years ago, and in most cases when we vaccinate children against diseases, we're vaccinating children because we really want to protect those children from those diseases that can shorten or end their lives. The polio vaccine, the measles vaccine, the mumps vaccine. These are diseases that are devastating to children. Here, the real impetus for vaccinating children is to protect the rest of us because children are, clearly carriers of COVID. So you have to be incredibly vigilant about the potential side effects of the vaccine, because now you're talking about, is it ethical to vaccinate a child in order to protect everybody else? Yes, it's true the child could also get COVID, but the variants of COVID that are affecting children are not necessarily the variants that are perfectly covered by the vaccines we have today.
Right. Well, that brings me to the next question, because you are working on helping develop the Israelmade vaccine. We've read that one of its advantages is going to be that it's going to be more effectively or be more easily, say, modulated to deal with the variants of coronavirus. Where does that Israelmade vaccine stand today?
Well, actually, just last week, I saw the very first human data of how this vaccine performs against the Delta variant. It's information that Macron gave me permission to say that tonight, and they're going to be releasing the data in a scientific forum in very short order. The reason to be so optimistic is twofold. First of all, the Israeli vaccine is the only vaccine that presents the entire spike protein of the coronavirus to the body's immune system. And people say, well, what does Israel have to do with developing a vaccine? Well, if you go to the Macron Biologie, you'll see a picture of Jonas Salk, the developer of the poliovirus vaccine, sitting with Yitzhak Ben Zvi,
the president of Israel.
The president of Israel. So this is a 60, 70-year-old tradition of expertise with regard to developing vaccines against very, very dangerous diseases.
Right. So given, I know there are clinical tests underway, it's being done in countries, right, such as Ukraine, for example?
Well, actually, the first country is going to be Georgia.
Georgia.
And we're hoping to start that trial very quickly. As you know, we have already shipped experimental supplies to Georgia. We're waiting for some final paperwork from the Macron so that we're ready, and final approval from the Georgia Ministry of Health. And everybody wants to get that trial going as quickly as possible. Now, it turns out that the phones have been ringing off the hook in Israel with people in Israel wanting to be part of that phase 2-3 trial. So we expect that it will not only be Georgia and Ukraine and several European countries, but Israel will also have a chance to participate in the phase 3.
Right. If all goes well, it's hard to estimate these things. If all goes well, how soon could that vaccine come to market?
If we can do everything perfectly, and that's rare in biotech, right, there's a chance that by the May-June, when people need their next boost, at least some of them may have a chance to get this vaccine.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned Dr. Jonas Salk, because it relates somewhat to the issue of giving it to children. I happen to have been among that first generation that got the polio vaccine, but I received the oral vaccine developed by Dr. Albert Sabin, of course, which made it a lot easier to give it to children. Now, there had been some...
I actually remember how happy I was when they didn't have to hold me down to give me a shot.
Okay, so let me ask you, there had been some reports that perhaps this Israeli vaccine would be able to be delivered orally or in some other way other than vaccination, and that would, of course, maybe convince or help people who want to give it to their children, make it easier.
Well, the easier part isn't necessarily the issue, because we've had a nasal flu vaccine for 8 years now, and nobody really wants to use it. Right. The important part is maybe if you give this vaccine as a nasal vaccine, you can create better protection than if you inject it. And the reason is a little bit technical, but because this vaccine has the whole spike protein on its surface, it's actually incorporated into the cells in the nose where the COVID virus replicates and incubates and infects the rest of the body. So there's a chance that if this works as a nasal vaccine, instead of just having circulating antibodies to the virus throughout the body, you can have specific immunity in the nose and in the lungs where the virus does such damage.
So nasal will be nasal vaccine, not an oral vaccine.
Well, that's the hope. That's that's the next place we're going to research. But I don't want to tell you it's going to work.
Of course not. That of course have to be tested. Professor Jonathan Javitt and our Owen Alterman, thank you for joining us on the rundown.